All right, in this module, we're going to talk about the different ways that you can ship your product. You may be wondering, should I ship by air? Should I ship by sea? Should I use like FedEx? Should I use a freight forwarder? So I'm going to give you a few tips and things that you consider. Typically, things that are shipped by air are either small and lightweight, or you need them really, really fast. If you're doing a small order, you can ship by what's called courier. A courier is like a DHL or UPS or FedEx or one of those guys. Those are the major ones. There's some other ones as well, but those are the major ones that are actually called couriers. Those are what's called a door-to-door service. So basically, once it's shipped, all the paperwork is there by your supplier, and it's basically delivered to you. Those guys take care of all the customs. If they have a question, they'll call you. They take care of all the clearances and everything. Usually, those are only good for shipments that are in value of up to about $2,500. So if your value is greater than $2,500, those are not going to be really ideal for you unless you just have to have something really, really fast. It'll require some additional paperwork. Now, the next one is you have to deal with a customs broker. A customs broker, sometimes they also work one-on-one with the forwarder. Sometimes they're two different people. It just depends. But the customs broker is a person that actually will clear your shipment through the customs in the United States and does all the required paperwork. Now, usually that's mostly for sea shipments, but they also do some air freight. Now, there's two types of air freight. We'll talk about those in just a little bit, but there's air freight where you actually take the pallets or the boxes and they're rolled onto the plane, just like with your luggage. But then there's also the air freight, which are the couriers like FedEx and UPS and those guys that ship things by air. But a customs broker will take care of all the documentation for you. They'll give all the documents to the import agencies. They'll make sure everything, all the bonds are paid. They'll arrange usually the final delivery to Amazon or to your warehouse, and they'll charge fees for each of those. So when you get a quote for shipping by sea, you got to remember that price often is only for the actual time that it's on the water. Or if it's coming by air freight, a lot of times that's just the price for the air freight. There's going to be additional cost, and sometimes these are like 5 or 6, 7 line items on there. There's a fee for FedExing some documents. There's a fee for doing this clearance. There's a fee for filing this form. And so you got to remember those fees, those shipping fees are not the final price. It can start adding up to quite a bit. But still, usually sea shipments are usually far cheaper than doing air shipments. They do take a little bit longer to arrive, but sea shipments usually are based on volume and not on weight, versus air shipments are a combination of the two. That's how much space it takes up plus how much it weighs. Versus on sea, they really don't care how much something weighs. It's just how much space does it take up. And that usually determines the price as well as where it's going. The forwarder is the other person that often it can be the customs broker, or sometimes they're two different people, but the forwarder is the person that handles everything for you. Especially if you're doing something called EXW, like XWorks or FOB, they're the one that makes sure that everything gets taken where it needs to go. So like if your terms are EXW, which means the door of the factory, I can call my forwarder and say, hey, I've got this factory in Shenzhen. Here's the address and here's what you're picking up. And they take care of everything from there. They'll get the guy that goes to the factory door with his truck, picks everything up, takes it to the dock, the shipping port, puts it on the right ship and all that kind of stuff. Or if it's FOB, they take it over from the point where it's FOB. So if your supplier gives you terms that they're in Shenzhen and it says FOB Hong Kong, they're responsible for getting it to Hong Kong, and then from Hong Kong, your forwarder will take it on from there. Sometimes the forwarder can also do prep work for you. It just depends on the forwarder, or they're combining stuff, or maybe they're putting labels on things if you need something labeled. It just depends, and that's usually an extra fee. Now, when you're shipping to Amazon, you always have to be the importer of record. Amazon will not be the importer of record, so you have to use your EIN, which we talked about it's a government employee identification number from the IRS. You have to use that number, or if you're importing into Europe, it's your VAT number. And you're going to have to use that number because otherwise Amazon won't accept any responsibility. So you have to be the importer of record. And now sometimes when you use these freight forwarders, you might have to prepay. Usually with FedEx and those guys, depending on if they're billing, if you have an account set up, they can bill you. And that gives you a little bit of time to pay the bill, usually a week to a month. Or if your factory's paying it, they might incorporate that into the price. But on a freight forwarder, some of the freight forwarders will require their payment up front. Some of them will require a deposit up front and the rest of it before they actually deliver goods. Other ones will give you terms. It just depends on your relationship. So how do you know which one to choose? What are some of the basic, like a cheat sheet or so for what to choose? Now for couriers, those are the FedEx and UPS guys. Those are best if your stuff weighs less than about 150 kilos. So if as long as you're under 150 kilos, and it makes sense, that's where you might want to consider going. The average cost is about $6 per kilo. A kilo is 2.2 pounds. So that's roughly 13 bucks, or like $13 or so per kilo, or roughly $6, $7 per pound. So it can get expensive. The samples are the best to send that way. So when you're ordering samples, they're best to send by courier, just because you need them quickly and you need to make decisions, and it's not worth send them by sea or some other way. The other option is air. Now, air freight is different than courier. These are like the pallets. These are like the boxes in the belly of the plane, down where your luggage is. Can be okay for between about 150 to 500 kilos. Or if you need something like super fast. I've had in the past where I ran out of something at Christmas time. Instead of shipping it by sea like normal, I had everything shipped in by air. It cost me like $18,000, which is by sea it would have been like $6,000, but I had to have the stuff, and it made sense for me to do it. Usually shipping by air is somewhere around $4 per kilo, but during high peak seasons like Christmas or right before Chinese New Year, those rates can go up. It just depends on the capacity of the plane and how it's being routed, what that price is, but roughly $4 per kilo. So it's a little bit cheaper than the UPS and FedEx guys. That's why it's better for the bigger quantities. If you go to smaller quantities that way, it can be expensive. The other thing about air is you can't just have your supplier go down to the local airport and say Shenzhen and ship it to you in Denver, and you go down to the Denver airport and pick it up from the airport. It doesn't work like that. You still have to have a customs broker that's going to clear it and get all the documents for you, and perhaps even have to arrange delivery to you or to Amazon. Another way you can ship is by sea. This is usually ideal for things that are shipments that are over 500 kilos, so over about 1,200 pounds or so, or the product's really big and bulky. This is by far the cheapest way. Like I said earlier, the rates depend on the volume, not on how much weight it takes. Typically, you're looking at anywhere from, depending if it's coming from Asia, anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks on the sea. You also have to get sailing slots. So during busy times, like right before fourth quarter, it might be hard to get a sailing slot. So your stuff might be waiting for a week at the dock before it can get onto a ship. It just depends. Now, some people like to ship straight to Amazon. I personally don't do that. But a lot of people like to ship straight to Amazon. I like to have everything come into a 3PL or to my warehouse first and then send it out from there. But some people, they go straight into Amazon. And there's a document that will show you some of the requirements for that. You would have to have your Chinese supplier label the boxes, all the cartons in the proper way, and put all the shipping compartments on there. But you can also ship into Amazon by what's called LTL. And LTL means less than truckload. And so that means that everything is put on pallets, and you can't fill up a whole truck. Most of these trucks are like trailers, or some of them are like 53 feet long, and you can't fill up the whole thing. You only got 4 pallets. It fills up like an eighth of it or something. And so your stuff is combined with other people's stuff. But you can use Amazon shipping rates to actually ship these in, and it can be really, really cheap versus trying to do it yourself. So that's one way to ship it in. Another way is you can ship stuff in by FedEx or UPS ground, and you can use Amazon's preferred rates, and they're really, really cheap, like dirt cheap. But what I do is at Christmas time, stuff takes longer to be checked in by truck. If I send something by truck, it's the cheapest way. By LTL, it might take a few days to a week or two to get checked in into the warehouse and start being available for sale. If I have something that I really need to get there quick, or I'm about to run out of stock, I will ship some or perhaps even all the order by UPS or FedEx ground. Even though it costs a little bit more, those typically get checked in a lot quicker. Now there is tier pricing, so the more you ship, the better price you can get for freight, for the LTL or even there's FTL, full truckload. Now remember, anything over 50 pounds has to have a sticker on it that says heavy or heavy lift. If you don't do that, Amazon can penalize you. Just a few more tips on your shipping. If you're going to use containers, you want to try to fill it as much as possible. If you have there's 20-foot containers and 40-foot containers. So you want to try to fill those up as much as you possibly can, because you're going to get the most value, because even if the container is half full, you're going to be paying for the whole container. So when you're placing your order, sometimes your factory may say, hey, why don't you just bump the order up and get you fill up the container. You got to do the math and see if that makes sense for you cash flow wise. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it comes partial, or maybe they combine it with another person's shipment. And then when it gets to the port in California or New York or wherever it's going, it gets split up from there. You can also go, if you want to get an estimate, you're just like, I need to get a rough idea before I see what this is going to cost. And you're just kind of in the product discovery phase. You can go to World Freight Rates, worldfreightrates.com, and get a rough estimate of what it's going to cost to bring it in. Now, you're a freight forwarder, whoever's doing it for you could have different negotiated terms or something, but that's just a place where you can go and get a basic idea. And you also have to make sure all your master cartons, that's the big boxes that contain all the individual boxes of your product inside, that they're really well packaged, like we talked about in one of the previous modules, with the at least a 5-wall container, if not 7 walls. And you want to make sure that your company name is on the outside of those boxes. Your factory might ask you, what do you want imprinted on your master cartons? It needs to be your company name. You might have a part number or a description of the item, and it needs to say made in China on the outside too. The country of origin is super important. So if it's made in China, or if it's made in Taiwan, or if it's made in India, wherever it's made, that has to be on the outside of the container as well as on your product. It's super important. You can have a customs delay or a holdup or a fine if you don't do that correctly. You also want to ask, like I said, for make sure your cartons are strong and sturdy, and they have the corner protectors like I talked about in a previous module. You also a bond is also required to import into the United States. And these bonds, you can either do a one-time bond for about $60, or you can do an annual bond for about $400. Depends on how much you're going to ship in. If you think you're going to be shipping in quite a bit per year, you might as well do the annual bond at $400. But if it's your first shipment and you're on you don't know if you're going to be shipping more, or you're on a tight budget, you can pay an individual bond roughly $60. Your freight forwarder or your customs broker can usually handle that for you, but they might have a slight markup. If you go to bonds for the number 4 customs.com, sometimes you can buy these cheaper directly there, and then you can just give them that information. Another option is to add insurance to your shipment. It's not too often that a ship sinks at sea. I mean, it does happen from time to time, or something gets lost. But if you want to add insurance, it's not too expensive. You can ask your freight forwarder or your customs broker who they might recommend or what it would cost through them. Or you can look at some outside companies like TRG Direct, for example, or TradeRiskGuarantee.com, and see what they might charge you for insurance. That's totally up to you if you do that or not. And like we talked about in another module, there's some documents that are required: the bill of lading, the commercial invoice, and the packing slip. You're going to make sure that the shipper or your factory sends those to you, because you're going to need those to get customs clearance. Usually they don't have them prepared right away. It's usually a week or two later while everything's in process. It's on the sea being shipped. You're going to need to make sure you get those documents. If you do have prep work that needs to be done, you can go to prepshipglobal.com. You don't have to use these guys, but they'll give you a rough idea of how much it might cost to do some prep work and to bring everything over, just to get rough ideas when you're doing your estimating. And then you can go with whoever you want to go with. Now, remember, Amazon charges you storage fees. They don't want to become, like as I said before, a warehouse. They're a fulfillment center. So if you send a lot of stuff directly to Amazon, or send things into Amazon and it's just not selling, they're going to charge you anywhere from, it depends, but a couple dollars or more per month per square foot. And during the fourth quarter, those rates go up super, super high. So you want to really make sure you don't overstock the Amazon warehouses. You have enough in there, you have at least a 30-day supply, and then you either have more stuff about to arrive from China, or you have a 3PL or your own warehouse that's kind of feeding that stuff in as it's necessary. So I hope those tips have helped you a little bit, and will give you some good guidance. Now let's take a look now at another little cheat sheet on just a couple other things about when you're deciding which mode of freight should you actually use. And the true thing here is, do you want to save time or do you want to save money? Because usually you can't do both. So if you want speed, this is about how long it takes to come from China, from US door to door. If you're sending premium express, usually takes about 1 to 2 days, because China is it depends anywhere from 12 to 15 hours ahead of the United States. So you get that kind of benefit there. Express freight takes about 3 days. If you're doing premium air freight, it takes about 5 to 8 days. So these are different levels of air freight. Normal air freight, where it's in the belly of the plane and it's just you're like, okay, give me the best deal, is about 8 to 10 days. That one they won't prioritize you. You might get routed from Hong Kong to Beijing, from Beijing to Seattle, and then Seattle to New York or something. Versus the express or the premium one's more of a direct, but you pay for that. Premium or expedited ocean freight usually takes about 18 to 30 days. And normal ocean freight can be as much as 30 or 40 days. And that includes the time in customs and the time it takes to unload it from the ship and all that kind of stuff. So for each one of these, you got to determine what is the best thing. They both have fixed cost and they both have variable cost. The variable cost usually is the weight, can determine which way you do things, and the volume can determine which way you do things. So the cheapest method is normally going to depend on the shipment weight. So just as a rough guide, express freight is usually cheapest for shipments that weigh less than 50 kilos. Air freight is usually the cheapest for things that weigh between about 50 and 500 kilos. And for ocean freight, it's usually best for anything that weighs more than 500 kilos. So those are just a couple things that you should keep in mind when you're choosing which way to ship stuff. And there's one more thing that I want to talk to you about that to give you just a couple quick tips on things you may need, some documents you might need. Sometimes you might need a certificate of origin. And this is, customs may require this if there's any rebates. Sometimes there's rebates or exemptions, or there's an embargoes on certain things coming in, and maybe your product is exempt from that. Or maybe there's some sort of rebate going on where you can get some of the duties or the customs fees back. And so you might need a certificate of origin for that. And usually that's only necessary the first time you bring some things in, and then they have it in the system. So you might be asked for that, and your factory can usually provide that. And like I said, you're going to need a commercial invoice. That's basically the standardized description of what's in your shipment and how much are you paying for it. And that's what's used to actually determine how much duties or tariffs or VAT, if you're shipping to Europe, you might have to pay. The other one, you might need what's called an MSDS. That's a material safety data sheet. We talked about that in another module. And that's usually required for things that contain potentially hazardous materials, any kind of chemicals or fertilizers or cleaning supplies or anything that could be flammable. That's usually a data sheet that's provided by your factory or by an independent lab. Usually your factory can provide it. That shows at what temperature do things explode or catch on fire. And then if you're shipping anything that has wood or has pallets, you might need a fumigation certificate. And that fumigation certificate basically says this wood is clean of any animals or insects or any diseases, because wood is a big transporter of insects and different kinds of things from country to country. So you might have to have a certificate that is a fumigation certificate. And usually your freight forwarder or your supplier, your factory can provide that. So hopefully this has given you quite a bit of more information to think about on your shipping and deciding which is the best way for you to get your products from the manufacturer into Amazon and ready for sale. So I will see you in the next module.